I still remember the morning like it was yesterday. The sun had barely risen, yet the city was already alive with the relentless hum of car horns, street vendors calling out, and motorbikes weaving between vehicles in chaotic rhythm. I had woken earlier than usual, my body aching from the endless weeks of work, but determined to handle a few errands before the office. Little did I know, that morning would mark the beginning of the greatest betrayal I would ever endure. My house was quiet, too quiet. My son, Emmanuel, usually up before me, hadn't touched the breakfast I had prepared. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and roasted bread filled the kitchen, yet the plates remained untouched. I called out, "Emmanuel, breakfast is ready." There was no response, just the distant sound of a radio playing soft Afrobeats from his room. Something tugged at my chest, an inexplicable unease, but I brushed it aside. Teenagers and young adults often preferred their sleep, I told myself, even at 25. It wasn't until I sat at my laptop, intending to check some online transactions, that the cold, numbing panic set in. The screen blinked as I logged into my bank account. I had saved every shilling I earned over the years, investing carefully, planning for my future, my retirement, the dreams I had for my family. But as the page loaded, my heart stopped. The balance stared back at me, 0. For a moment, the numbers made no sense. I refreshed the page, hoping for a technical error, a glitch that would restore my sanity. But the numbers remained the same. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath me, leaving only emptiness. I clicked on the transaction history, each line a dagger, transfers to unknown accounts, payments I didn't authorize, withdrawals I hadn't made. And then it hit me with the force of a hurricane, Emmanuel. I called his phone immediately, my hands shaking, the screen lighting up with hope. The first ring. The second. Then nothing. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, but it was the same. My mind raced. How could this be possible? My son, the boy I had held in my arms, who had called me mommy with such affection, could do this. Could take everything I had worked for, betray the love I had given him without hesitation. The truth came crashing down slowly but painfully. He hadn't acted alone. The transfer records, the booking confirmations, the messages I intercepted with my online tools, it was all too clear. He had left with his wife, Kioma, and, astonishingly, her mother, a woman I had once trusted as family. They had traveled together, leaving me behind, abandoned, humiliated, and destitute. My breath caught in my throat, my hands trembling. The betrayal was so deep, so intimate, that it felt like a physical blow to the chest. I sank onto the couch, the room spinning around me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall at first. Anger surged beneath the surface, cold and burning. My son, my own flesh and blood, had robbed me of more than money. He had stolen my dignity, my trust, the very foundation of my belief in family. And yet, amid the pain, a voice whispered inside me, steady and unyielding, "You will not break. You are stronger than this." For 2 days, I barely ate, barely slept. Friends called, neighbors whispered, and the shame pressed down on me like a heavy weight. I could not bear the thought of people knowing the truth, that my own child had betrayed me so completely. But hiding the pain would not bring my life back. No, I needed clarity. I needed a plan. I started meticulously, quietly, investigating. Every transaction, every transfer, every piece of digital trail they had left behind. Emmanuel's arrogance had been his weakness. He had left traces everywhere, confident in his cunning, convinced that his mother would never catch up to him. He was wrong. I had taught him well, after all, maybe too well, and now I would use everything I knew to hunt him down. My first break came when I discovered the flight booking records. They had traveled to Dubai, a city I had only seen in films, shimmering with glass towers and endless wealth. My stomach twisted. I didn't know anyone there, I didn't have resources like that. But I had something far stronger, determination, fire, and the unshakable will of a mother wronged. I made the decision swiftly. I would go after them. Not with pleading, not with begging, not with sorrow. But with strategy. With intellect. With every ounce of courage I had. I began planning. Every step was measured, calculated. I booked a flight in secrecy, making sure that no one who might tip off Emmanuel could know. I packed lightly, knowing that speed and stealth were my allies. The flight was long, the hours stretching endlessly. I could not sleep, my mind racing through every memory I had of him, the day he was born, the first steps, the laughter, the cries, the arguments, the small victories, the school achievements. How could a boy I had nurtured with such care become a man capable of such cruelty? The questions gnawed at me, but I could not afford to dwell on them. Dwelling was a luxury I no longer had. I needed action. Arriving in Dubai was disorienting. The city was dazzling, overwhelming, almost unreal. Skyscrapers reached into the clouds, cars shone like mirrors, and people moved with a confident, unhurried stride that contrasted sharply with the chaos of my home city. I navigated the unfamiliar streets with caution, relying on every scrap of information I had gathered. The first contacts I made were people Emmanuel had done business with: small investors, hotel managers, and local brokers. At first, they were skeptical, wary of a stranger claiming to know someone who had defrauded me. But as I revealed my knowledge, the documents, the bank transfers, the evidence of deceit, their expressions shifted. Some were fearful of his influence, others sympathetic, and a few intrigued by the audacity of a mother pursuing her son across continents. I could feel their respect growing, and with it, my confidence. I discovered that Emmanuel and Kyoma had rented a small, opulent villa on the outskirts of the city, a place that stood out against the desert landscape like a jewel in the sand. They had believed they were untouchable, that the distance would protect them, that their crimes would never catch up. They were wrong. I had caught up. The first time I saw them from a distance, my heart ached in a strange combination of sorrow and fury. Emmanuel was laughing, a carefree, arrogant laugh that I remembered all too well. Kyoma clung to him, and her mother hovered like a spectre, protective and smug. They had no idea that I was there, tracking their every move, plotting my next step with precision. I spent days observing them, learning their routines, their habits, the small patterns that revealed vulnerability. Emmanuel was reckless, overconfident, and unafraid of consequence. Kyoma was arrogant, relying on her charms to manipulate situations. And the mother-in-law, she was calculating, always watching, always evaluating. But even the most cunning have weaknesses. I found theirs. One evening, I made my move. I sent a subtle message, disguised as a business inquiry, that hinted at my knowledge. Emmanuel dismissed it at first, chuckling with Kyoma over drinks on their terrace. But the seed of fear had been planted. Over the next days, the messages became more pointed, revealing details they could not have imagined I knew. Each message was precise, deliberate, a warning wrapped in civility. I could see the shift in Emmanuel. The arrogance began to crack, replaced by unease. Kyoma's laughter grew forced, and the mother-in-law's eyes narrowed in suspicion. They were realizing, slowly, that the woman they had wronged was no longer the naive mother they had underestimated. I was their reckoning. By the time I cornered them in that villa, I was ready. I didn't burst in, I didn't yell. I entered quietly, letting them discover me at the moment I chose. The shock on Emmanuel's face was priceless. His bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear I had never seen before. Kyoma shrieked, her mother stammered excuses, but I stood calm, composed, and merciless in my resolve. "You took what was mine," I said softly, my voice steady, yet cutting through the tension like a blade. "You thought you could run, that distance would protect you, that I would never catch up. But here I am." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the city outside. Emmanuel's eyes darted around, seeking an escape that didn't exist. Kyoma tried to regain control with angry words, but I ignored her. The mother-in-law attempted to intervene, but her voice trembled with fear. I had the upper hand. I revealed the evidence, the proof of every transaction, every deceitful act. Their faces turned pale as the realization sank in. I wasn't here to negotiate sentimentality. I was here to reclaim what was mine. I demanded the return of the money, every last cent, and presented legal documents that ensured they could never touch my life again. The confrontation was intense, draining, yet I remained unbroken. I had become a force forged by betrayal, sharpened by heartbreak, and guided by the unshakable will of justice. The first night in Dubai, I barely slept. My mind raced, replaying every interaction with Emmanuel, Kyoma, and her mother. I traced the path of their lies, the audacity of their theft, and the arrogance that had led them to believe I would never find them. But I had found them, and now I needed patience. Revenge was not a hasty storm, it was a slow, meticulous tide that eventually breaks the strongest walls. I rented a small apartment in a modest part of the city, far from the glittering hotels they favored. From there, I watched, I listened, and I planned. Dubai was overwhelming, the glimmer of skyscrapers, the endless neon, the crowded souks, but I moved like a shadow. People noticed me only when I wished them to, and even then, curiosity outweighed suspicion. The first step was information. I spent hours in local cafes with my laptop, cross-referencing bank transactions, rental agreements, and messages. The city was a maze, and every alley, every office, and every street held a secret. I spoke to local staff at shops, delivery drivers, and even hotel concierges, always carefully masking my purpose. Slowly, a picture emerged: the villa they had rented, the accounts they were using to launder my money, the people who had been complicit. But Emmanuel was clever, at least in his own mind. He had covered his tracks well, relying on the assumed protection of his wife's connections. Kyoma's mother had been the mastermind behind much of it, her calm demeanor hiding a mind that could manipulate, deceive, and intimidate with ease. I knew that confronting them directly without preparation would be foolish. I needed leverage, concrete, undeniable evidence that could force them to surrender. I began gathering allies. I found a local lawyer who specialized in financial crimes, someone who knew the system and had contacts. I discreetly met with a former banker who had worked in some of the accounts Emmanuel had used. I spoke to hotel staff, business contacts, and even people who had been scammed by their fraudulent ventures. Each conversation, each meeting, was like a thread weaving a net around them. I wasn't angry, I was precise. My revenge would not be reckless. It would be surgical. In the evenings, I would sit in my apartment, looking at the city lights stretching into the desert horizon. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, letting the waves of grief and anger wash over me before I pushed them aside. I remembered the sacrifices I had made for Emmanuel, sleepless nights, long hours at work, every decision guided by a desire to give him a better life. And yet, here I was, betrayed by the very blood that ran through me. But betrayal, I realized, could be transformed into strength. Every tear, every pang of hurt, was fuel. I was no longer the naive mother who had trusted blindly. I was a hunter, and my prey was arrogant and unprepared. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. I had arranged to meet one of the middlemen who had helped Emmanuel set up his fake businesses. The man, a nervous fellow named Karim, had been cautious at first, unsure of who I was or why I was asking questions. But when I showed him the evidence, screenshots of transactions, official receipts, even photos of documents, his demeanor shifted. Fear replaced skepticism. "You don't understand," he stammered. They're dangerous. They know people. Powerful people." I smiled, a quiet, cold smile. "Dangerous? Perhaps. But they are not invincible. And now, they are within my reach." From that moment, Karim became an unwitting ally. He gave me details I could never have uncovered on my own: the villa's security routines, the guards' shifts, and the digital backups they had hidden in their cloud accounts. With each piece of information, my net tightened, and my confidence grew. Days turned into a week. I had observed their routines meticulously. Emmanuel would spend mornings in the villa office, Kyoma would go shopping or meet friends in the city, and her mother would hover, always observing, always calculating. They were so used to privilege, to wealth and influence, that they had underestimated someone like me. A mother who had nothing but determination and fury could be more dangerous than 1,000 lawyers or detectives. One night, I decided it was time to make a move. I knew I could not storm the villa, the guards were vigilant, and a direct approach would alert them immediately. Instead, I created a plan that relied on patience and psychological pressure. I sent anonymous messages, subtle, carefully worded hints that I knew everything, that their deeds were exposed, that their freedom was fragile. I left traces that would make them doubt every ally, every business contact, every step they took. The effect was immediate. Emmanuel, who had once laughed at threats, became restless. I saw it through subtle cues in the messages I intercepted from his contacts, terse replies, over-explaining, paranoia creeping into his tone. Kyoma's laughter, once carefree, became nervous. Her mother's calm, commanding presence faltered. She paced, muttered under her breath, and spent hours on calls I couldn't trace. The empire they believed they controlled was crumbling under invisible hands, mine. But the path was not without danger. One evening, a man approached me in the alley near my apartment. He was tall, intimidating, his eyes sharp and suspicious. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a voice low and threatening. "We know who you are." My heart raced for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction. I looked him in the eye, unflinching. "Do you?" I said, my voice calm, almost serene. "Then you." "No, I am not afraid." He studied me, perhaps trying to gauge if I was lying, and then nodded slowly. "Be careful. You're in over your head." I let him walk away, my mind racing. Every move now carried risk. Emmanuel and Kyoma were not ordinary thieves. They had connections, and I had to tread carefully. But fear had no place in me. I refused to be intimidated. Every warning, every threat, only strengthened my resolve. The following days were a test of endurance. I moved through the city with caution, gathering evidence, preparing legal documents, and ensuring that when the moment came, I would have undeniable leverage. I even hired discreet investigators, people who could observe without being seen. The villa, once a fortress of arrogance and impunity, began to feel smaller, weaker, exposed. I still remember the night I first saw them panic. I had orchestrated a small leak, a false message suggesting an audit, a legal inquiry into their finances. It was enough. Emmanuel snapped at Kyoma over a dinner that had been meant for laughter and celebration. His voice was sharp, panicked. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Who knew?" Kyoma's face turned pale. "I don't know. Maybe it's nothing." Her mother slammed her hand on the table. "This is serious. Someone knows. Someone knows everything." And I watched, from the shadows of a rented car across the street, the seeds of doubt and fear I had planted beginning to grow. For the first time, they understood that they were not untouchable, that the world had teeth, and those teeth had found them. It was during this time that I remembered the nights I had spent comforting Emmanuel when he had nightmares as a child. I had whispered to him, calmed him, promised him safety. And now, the roles had reversed. The child I had nurtured, the son I had loved, was terrified of the mother he had betrayed. It was not joy I felt, it was a bitter satisfaction, the taste of justice long overdue. I had to be careful. Revenge is a delicate art. Too harsh, and it could backfire. Too weak, and it would not serve as the lesson it needed to. I was learning the balance of fear and persuasion, and slowly, Emmanuel and his accomplices were unraveling. The breakthrough came when I obtained the final proof, digital backups of the transactions, recordings of their fraudulent dealings, and copies of contracts signed in deception. With these, I had the power to destroy not only their financial standing but their credibility, their reputation, everything they had built on stolen foundations. I arranged a meeting, discreet, under the guise of a negotiation. Emmanuel and Kyoma, thinking they were about to resolve minor financial disputes, entered the room confidently. But I had prepared the stage. Evidence laid out, legal documents ready, and witnesses, including Kareem and the banker, present to validate everything. When I spoke, my voice was calm, unwavering, and icy with authority. "You took what was mine," I began. "You thought distance and wealth could protect you. You thought you could run, that I would never find you, that I would never fight. You were wrong." Emmanuel's jaw tightened, Kyoma's eyes widened, and her mother's hands trembled. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that love and family would blind me to betrayal. But they had forgotten something fundamental. The fire of a mother scorned is not easily extinguished. I laid out the evidence methodically, each fact hitting them like a hammer. Transfers, accounts, rental agreements, photos, messages, nothing could be disputed. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with realization. My son, who had once been my pride, now shrank under the weight of truth. I demanded restitution. Every last cent had to be returned. Legal agreements were drawn and signed, binding them from ever encroaching on my life again. The confrontation was draining, exhausting, but I remained resolute. I had transformed my anger into strategy, my grief into determination, my betrayal into action. When it was over, I left the villa not triumphant in arrogance but in quiet satisfaction. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, my power. The city, once alien and overwhelming, now felt like a landscape I had mastered. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of justice. The morning of the final confrontation was unusually quiet. Dubai's streets shimmered under the rising sun, reflecting off glass towers like molten gold. From my small apartment, I watched the city stir to life, the chaos below a stark contrast to the calm I had cultivated in my mind. Today, everything would change. Today, justice would no longer be a whisper, it would roar. I dressed carefully, not in flamboyant clothes, but in a way that conveyed authority, calmness, and precision. No fear, no anger in my eyes, only a quiet certainty. My allies, including Karim and the former banker, had gathered the final pieces of evidence: bank statements, digital transaction records, signed contracts, photographs, even recordings of conversations that proved intent. Every detail of their betrayal was meticulously documented. I had built an unbreakable chain of accountability. The villa was on the outskirts, surrounded by manicured gardens and high walls. Emmanuel had believed he was untouchable, and for a moment, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile at the memory of his arrogance. I had learned to be patient, to move like water, calm, steady, and unstoppable. My plan was simple yet devastatingly effective: confrontation backed by irrefutable evidence and witnesses. I arrived at the villa early, the sun barely above the horizon. My heart, surprisingly, was steady. I had no fear, only purpose. I rang the bell. The door opened before I could knock again. Emmanuel's face was a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Mom?" he asked, the word trembling, uncertain. He hadn't expected me here, not like this, not now. Kyoma's eyes widened, and her mother stepped behind her, trying to exude authority, to mask the panic that simmered beneath the surface. I walked in slowly, my gaze sweeping the room, taking in every detail, every sign of arrogance that had filled their lives. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice calm but resonant, each word measured. "You believed I would not find you, that distance would shield you, that greed could overpower love. You were wrong." Emmanuel's bravado faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Kyoma tried to laugh it off, but it was hollow, forced, a laugh that trembled at the edges. Her mother's hands tightened over the edge of the table, knuckles white. I had allies with me, unseen in the shadows, prepared to testify. I began laying out the evidence. Each document, each screenshot, each transaction was presented methodically. The sound of paper, of digital screens being projected, filled the room with a silent authority. Emmanuel's eyes widened as recognition dawned. He tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "No. Listen. Hear everything, because the truth is more powerful than your lies." They were stunned into silence. I watched their faces, saw the panic creep in, the first real fear they had ever felt in their lives. This was the moment I had envisioned countless times, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Justice demanded it. My son had betrayed me, and the world had to know that betrayal has consequences. "You think wealth makes you untouchable," I said, pacing. Slowly. "You think your mother-in-law's influence, Kyoma's charm, and your arrogance can protect you. But I have everything you thought you had hidden. I have witnesses, documents, proof. And I have the patience to use it." I handed over a folder of documents to Karim, who stepped forward. He was nervous, but professional. "These are copies," he said, his voice steady. "Everything she says is true. You cannot deny it." Kyoma's mother tried to interrupt, but her words faltered. Her eyes darted to Emmanuel, searching for support. But he was silent, defeated, and for the first time, I realized just how fragile he had become. The man who had once held his head high, who had laughed at warnings, was now trembling under the weight of his own misdeeds. "You've stolen from me," I continued, my voice unwavering. "But more than that, you've broken trust. You've shattered the bond between mother and son, between family. And yet, I am not here for vengeance alone. I am here for restoration. Return what belongs to me. Return it fully, without delay, without excuses." Emmanuel swallowed hard, his jaw tight. "Mom." His voice faltered, trailing off. For the first time, I saw the man he could have been, had he chosen integrity over greed. But that man was gone. What remained was someone who had learned too late the consequences of his actions. Kyoma finally spoke, her voice quivering. "Please, we can work something out. Just no," I said firmly, cutting her off. "There is no negotiation. The law, and the evidence, will speak. What you took must be returned. Every cent. And you will sign documents ensuring you cannot ever touch my life again." The confrontation stretched for hours. Emmanuel tried to argue, to find loopholes, to appeal to sentimentality, but each argument was dismantled by facts, by witnesses, by the irrefutable truth I had gathered. I saw the panic deepen, the confidence drain from them like water through a sieve. Their carefully constructed world was collapsing, and they could not stop it. At one point, Emmanuel's voice broke. I didn't know it would come to this. I thought, you thought," I said softly, almost kindly, "that you could betray me and escape. But thought without respect, without accountability, is worthless. You are accountable now. You will face the consequences." The legal papers were drawn and signed. The transfers were reversed. Bank accounts frozen. Every asset I had lost was reclaimed. The relief was almost surreal, but beneath it was a deeper, quieter victory. I had not only reclaimed my money but my dignity, my power, my voice. As they signed the last of the documents, Emmanuel looked up at me, eyes wide with shock and shame. "Mom, I'm sorry." I shook my head. Sorry is meaningless without action. Today, you have action, and I have justice. Remember this lesson, Emmanuel. Betrayal may seem easy, but it always carries a price. Kyoma and her mother followed suit, their faces pale, their arrogance replaced with fear. They knew, as I did, that the world would never allow such deception to go unchallenged. Today, I had shown them the power of truth, courage, and relentless determination. Leaving the villa that afternoon, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The city, once foreign and intimidating, now seemed familiar, almost welcoming. I had navigated its complexities, confronted its challenges, and emerged victorious. I was no longer just a mother, I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger, wiser, unbroken. Returning home, I stepped into my apartment with a sense of calm triumph. The city around me buzzed with life, oblivious to the battle that had just concluded, yet I knew that the world had shifted. I had reclaimed not only what was mine but also the narrative of my own life. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had known of my ordeal, began to see me differently. No longer a victim, I was now a symbol of strength and justice. I had transformed my pain into power, my grief into strategy, my betrayal into wisdom. In the weeks that followed, I took time to reflect. I remembered the nights I had cried alone, the moments I had doubted my own strength, the humiliation I had endured. And yet, each memory was now a stepping stone, a reminder of the resilience that had carried me through. I had been tested, and I had prevailed. Emmanuel never spoke to me again. I do not know where he is today, and I do not seek him. What matters is that I have reclaimed my life. I am free, empowered, and unshakable. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. I learned that truth, meticulously pursued, always finds its way to victory. I sometimes sit by my window, looking out at the city, remembering the journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the meticulous planning, the confrontation. I smile, not out of cruelty, but because I survived. I thrived. I conquered. Revenge is not always about violence or chaos. It is about precision, patience, and the refusal to be broken. It is about proving, first to yourself and then to the world, that betrayal does not define you. I had turned the greatest pain of my life into the ultimate testament of strength. And in that victory, I found peace. I am a mother. I am a woman. I am unstoppable. And I have proven, beyond doubt, that no betrayal is too great to overcome, no injustice too powerful to challenge. My son may have emptied my bank account, may have betrayed me, but he has taught me the greatest lesson of all: never underestimate a mother scorned, a woman awakened, and a soul determined to reclaim what is hers. And so, I live, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in triumph, the quiet, undeniable, unshakable victory of truth and courage prevailing against all odds.